Well today, so we're going to make this speech short. I'm going to cover three short topics. The first topic, 5 years ago yesterday, there was a horrific incident that happened in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Bernard Tranel, who was holding a Donald Trump sign, was assassinated. Somebody came out on a bicycle with a mask over his head. We don't even know if he was a black man or a white man, but with a mask over his head. He saw a guy named Bernard Tranel holding a sign for Trump, and that person came up and killed Bernard Tranel. Bernard Tranel was kind of an iconoclast. Okay, Bernard Tranel was a Rastafarian. I'm not sure I pronounced that right. He was for Black Lives Matter. He frequently endorsed Democrat politicians, but for whatever reason, Bernard Tranel was in the very liberal east side of Milwaukee, or the River West neighborhood of Milwaukee, very, very left-wing. Bernard Tranel swam upstream and decided to carry a Donald Trump sign. He was assassinated. This is the type of thing, as we see America decline, we ought to have been talking more about. It's the type of thing that happens in Mexico. It's the type of thing that happens in Honduras, where during elections you can expect somebody is assassinated. You wouldn't think it was happening in the United States. One of the things we have to take into account when we look at this situation is not only is it something you would expect to happen in a third world country, but I felt at the time the liberal establishment in Milwaukee didn't treat it different than any other murder. And when you begin to shoot people for carrying a yard sign that people don't like, we're in new territory. But shot he was. I went down and saw his neighborhood, and we cannot allow this to go on. We cannot allow these people to do such a thing. I don't like talking or describing people as black or white, but in my opinion, at that time in 2020, the Democrat Party was afraid of some black people voting for Trump, and I wondered if that's one of the reasons why they decided to target Bernard Tranel. But target him they did. They shot him dead. The establishment in Milwaukee at that time implied that perhaps the reason he was shot had nothing to do with politics. We don't know it was politics. I mean, just because he was carrying a Trump sign doesn't mean that he was shot for carrying a Trump sign, but of course he was shot for carrying a Trump sign. In this very liberal neighborhood, the guy came up, they have pictures of it, the guy came up on a bicycle. How often do you have somebody, you hear about people being shot when somebody shoots out of a car, but here he was shot by somebody on a bicycle, so it had to be somebody in the neighborhood. I will say this, there was a time where Republicans stepped up and put a given amount of people available if somebody could turn in the person who shot Bernard Tranel. I'll say right now, I intend to tomorrow and next Monday find some people to put together and put a $30,000 bonus to anybody who can do something that leads to the conviction of the person who shot Bernard Tranel. And I'm going to contact the Milwaukee Police Department there. I'm told sometimes cold cases are a little bit, people begin to make more progress if $30,000 is thrown out there. I expect that hopefully will make some sort of difference. And like I said, this is a guy on a bicycle. It's not like somebody did a drive-by out of a car and was gone right after that. Apparently this guy lived within a few blocks of where Bernard Tranel was shot. Bernard Tranel, by the way, owned a print shop, so he had a commercial property there that people were aware of. Somebody has to know more. Somebody has to see where this bicyclist went. Presumably, somebody told the bicyclist we got to kill this guy. We can't have him elevating the number of people who are voting for Donald Trump in this radical liberal area to 15 or 20%. So, but in any event, let's not forget about it. The Republican Party should never forget about Bernard Tranel. The next thing I'm going to talk about here, it kind of bothers me when I think the conservative Republican movement, of which I consider myself one, aims so low below the target. A couple weeks ago, we had a newspaper article dealing with the U.S. Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court allowing children or parents to opt their children out of graphic LGBTQ books in Montgomery County, Alabama, or Montgomery County, Maryland. And this was supposed to be a great conservative victory, that a second grade child did not have to read books that were clearly designed to promote a lifestyle, a sexual lifestyle. And the Republicans considered this a great victory. It really bothers me that Republicans considered this a great victory. Was this a great victory? Because of the Supreme Court decision, we wind up having maybe 1 out of 20 parents who are on the ball enough to say that we are not going to allow or not going to force parents to or parents are not going to create a situation in which their children have to read LGBTQ books. That's preposterous. It never should have happened in the first place. But instead, they're pretending like this is a great victory. Another thing about this so-called great victory, 3 of the 10 judges on the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that this was no big deal. That in fact, parents shouldn't be able to object to their children reading books of a sexual nature in first or second grade or up to 5th grade, apparently. I mean, that's almost beyond belief how far down we've come as a society. And the conservative news media, Fox News, that type of thing, they thought this was a victory. Can you believe that? We're handing out LGBTQ books in first and second graders. The Supreme Court, with 3 people dissenting, 3 judges, rules that we don't have to have children go here, and if 5% or 4% of the parents opt out, that's a great victory. Is that what America has come down to? I would hope the comatose clergy in this country wake up, demand that schools not do any of this stuff, and begin to put elementary schools back where they were when I was a child, talking about reading, writing, not talking about LGBT, and not as saying it's a great victory if like 1 out of 20 parents says you don't have to give this to your kids. So let's dial it up, America. Let's dial it up, conservative news media. This was a horrific sign that 3 Supreme Court judges would have the nerve to say that parents shouldn't even be able to object to this, much less the idea that it's even in the schools in the first place to be objected to or otherwise. So there's your second issue of the day. The conservatives should wake up, you comatose people. Wake up, you comatose clergy. We do not have to have LGBTQ books in, couldn't exactly tell here. I think it's 5th grade, 4th grade, 3rd grade, and 2nd grade. I know down to 2nd grade. I mean, just unbelievable. Now, my third topic tonight, we passed the Great Big Beautiful Bill, and I voted for the Great Big Beautiful Bill, There were a lot of good things in the Great Big Beautiful Bill, but there were things that were highly questioned. And there's no question the number one defeat that I had in the Great Big Beautiful Bill was spending money on what they call low-income housing tax credits, in which a property developer, with some conditions, but was given tax credits equal to 70% of the cost of a building. In other words, he got to build the building, but the government would pay for 70% of the building. That's preposterous. Prior to us increasing the amount of credits, I felt I was in good shape. We had the Heritage Foundation editorialized against it, the Wall Street Journal editorialized against it, the Cato Institute editorialized against it. I thought all with just completely common sense, not to mention the average congressman should say it's not up to the government to pay for a private citizen's 70% of a private citizen's building. But that's what we have, and the Republicans, when the bill left the House, at that point, about $12 billion a year was spent on this. The Republicans, and we were told and given pep talks about how we're going to cut spending. Oh, man, we're going to cut spending. Wow, this is historic. Actually, increased spending on low-income housing tax credits in the House. That's preposterous. Then we sent it over to the Senate, and I was hoping, because I had a couple buddies over there around my side, that at least we'd go back to where we started in the Senate. But no, in the Senate, the free spending Republicans went up again. It's something we ought to spend a little bit more time looking at, how this was able to happen here. Why, with all the conservative think tanks types explaining it's a train wreck, why anybody with an ounce of common sense realizes it's a train wreck. The Republicans went ahead and upped spending on this program, first in the House and then in the Senate. So I hope the press corps is not going to forget about this program, and hope continues to follow it. The Washington Post, of all newspapers, pointed out, looking at about 4 or 5 different projects in the Washington, D.C. area, they found that the cost of some of these was over $1.2 million a unit. Is that possible at the time we had this supposedly tight budget? We're going to spend over $1.2 million per unit? Just unbelievable. We're going to give the chair here a bonus on something I noticed when I was back home. My good friend from Ohio decided to talk a little bit about all the wonderful things we could do with gambling proceeds. When I was first involved in politics, gambling was considered a sin and it was against the law because we knew we were taking money from the poorest people. Now, at least in Wisconsin, we've gone from, I believe, one small casino to have to be 15 casinos, including some huge casinos. In Wisconsin, they have separate slot machines in many bars. In the helpful Wisconsin, they sell scratch-offs in gas stations throughout the district. The reason it was brought up to me, I noticed that in some of these convenience stores, they're now selling $50 scratch-offs. Can you believe the horrible state of Wisconsin is selling $50 scratch-offs? My goodness, they're just shameful the way they take advantage of the poor and the dumb. It's just horrible. I don't think we would have put up with that when I first got involved in politics, but apparently Tony Evers thinks it's a great way to get more state money in to take advantage of people who are buying $50 lottery tickets. In any event, it's maybe not the biggest problem in America, but the number of people who are losing money at these slot machines and scratch-offs is not a small number. It's not something we should be proud of. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that the Democrat Party feels it's a great way to increase funding on schools, take advantage of people. But I don't think it's a good thing. And I wish my brothers and sisters in the state legislatures would get rid of some of these ridiculous machines and ridiculous scratch-offs, and stop taking advantage of the most vulnerable people in our society. Thank you very much. There's 4 different topics for you to remember. We covered the increased gambling pushed by state governments as they want to have government play a bigger and bigger role in life. We covered the ridiculous Republicans who think it's a victory that 3 Supreme Court judges ruled that you have to allow LGBTQ books in 2nd or 3rd grade. We covered Bernard Tranel, the poor guy who was assassinated for carrying a Trump sign 5 years ago yesterday, and we covered the low-income housing tax credits. I think the most questionable program in our Internal Revenue Code and probably in federal law altogether. Thank you very much.